Let's talk about some ancient weapons that were far too advanced for their time. These weapons will make you have a rethink about the technologies that may have been available to our forefathers, technologies that may have been lost with time. Try to picture a Byzantine warship in the year 678. An Arab fleet is closing in on Constantinople, hundreds of ships, thousands of men, and the city has no way to stop them. Then the Byzantine ships start spraying liquid fire across the water, and the fire keeps burning even as it floats on the waves. Enemy sailors jump overboard to escape the flames and drown instead. The siege breaks, Constantinople survives, but 13 centuries later, nobody on Earth can tell you exactly what was in that liquid. Start with that Byzantine fire, because it's the best example we have of a weapon that was so good it became a state secret. Historians call it Greek fire, and it first appears around 672 CE, credited to a refugee engineer named Kallinikos who fled to Constantinople as Arab armies swept through Syria. The Byzantines built pressurized bronze tubes called siphons, mounted them on the front of their ships, and used them to shoot burning liquid at enemy hulls from a distance. It was essentially a medieval flamethrower. What made it more terrifying was the fact that water can't put off the fire that this weapon shot out. Some accounts suggest that it burned even more fiercely when it touched the sea. It stuck to wood, to sails, to human skin, and normal methods of dousing a fire was ineffective against it. The only thing that seemed to work was a strange combination of vinegar, sand, and old urine, which tells you something about how desperate people got trying to fight it. The Byzantine state guarded the recipe like a nuclear code. Production was split across separate workshops so that no single craftsman knew the whole formula. Emperors passed the secret to their heirs with written warnings never to reveal it to foreigners, on pain of divine punishment, and it worked. From the Arab fleets to the Crusaders and the Ruse raiders, none of them ever managed to steal or reverse engineer the technology, even after capturing Byzantine ships intact. This secret was protected so well that the Byzantines eventually lost the recipe themselves. By the time of the Fourth Crusade, in the early 1200s, Greek fire had quietly disappeared from the historical record. Modern researchers have tried to recreate it using petroleum, pine resin, sulfur, and quicklime, and some of these mixtures do produce impressive, water-resistant flames. But nobody can say with confidence that any of them could match what those Byzantine sailors were actually spraying at their enemies. A weapon that was good enough to save an empire, and we still don't fully understand it today. Now let's go to the forge, because Byzantium wasn't the only civilization holding a technology that nobody else could match. Over 2,000 years ago, some blacksmiths in India figured out how to produce a type of steel called woots. It got shipped west to Damascus, where swordsmiths would turn it into swords. European crusaders who fought battles with these swords always came home with stories that sounded like myths. A Damascus blade could supposedly slice a piece of silk floating in midair. It could cut through lesser swords without losing its edge. For centuries, this sounded like exaggeration. It sounded like the kind of things soldiers would say about the enemy's gear to explain a loss. Then in 2006, a team of German physicists led by Peter Pofler at the Technical University of Dresden took a 17th century Damascus sword, dissolved a small piece of it in acid, and looked at the residue under an electron microscope. What they found was carbon nanotubes, one of the strongest materials known to modern engineering, sitting inside a sword forged 400 years before anyone had a name for nanotechnology. Nobody thinks medieval blacksmiths in Damascus understood atomic structures. What likely happened is that some trace elements in the Indian ore, when heated and cooled repeatedly, reacted in a way that encouraged these nanoscale structures to form naturally. The smiths couldn't have known any of this. They just knew that a certain process produced blades that behaved differently from anything else being made. When the original ore supply dried up in the 1700s, the technique died with it. Nobody has fully reproduced original Wootz Damascus steel since. Let us step away from swords for a second and talk about something that sounds almost too simple to matter: the sling. Every kid has swung a rock in a strip of leather and called it a weapon. But the ancient Balearic Islands, off the coast of Spain, produced slingers so feared that Carthage and Rome both recruited them as elite mercenary units. Archaeologists digging up their ammunition have discovered that the Balearic slingers used cast lead bullets, shaped almost exactly like a modern rifle bullet, pointed at both ends, symmetrical, aerodynamically refined. Some were even inscribed with taunts for the enemy. Studies estimate these lead projectiles could reach velocities that rival some early firearms, and they made a distinctive whistling sound as they cut through the air, enough to unnerve enemy troops before impact ever happened. This was a culture with no concept of aerodynamics as a science, independently arriving at a bullet shape through trial, error, and generations of practice passed from one slinger to the next. Meanwhile, Rome was busy solving a different problem with the javelin. Every army before them used spears and javelins that the enemy could simply pick up and throw straight back. Roman engineers designed a javelin called the pilum specifically to prevent that. The tip was a small, hardened pyramid built to punch through a shield, but the long iron shank behind it was left soft, deliberately under-hardened, so that on impact it would bend. A bent pilum sticking out of your shield wasn't just annoying. The shaft dragged on the ground, the weight pulled the shield down, and there was no clean way to yank the javelin free in the middle of a battle. Enemy soldiers were often forced to just drop the shield entirely, seconds before a wall of Roman legionaries closed the distance with short swords. Historians still debate exactly how deliberate the bending was in every version of the weapon, but the core idea shows engineering thinking that modern militaries still use in disposable weapon design today. China was solving an entirely different kind of problem. Somewhere around the 4th century BCE, Chinese engineers built a repeating crossbow known as the Zhujnu, sometimes credited to the strategist Zhu Liang centuries later, though tomb finds push its origin back much earlier. It had a wooden magazine sitting on top of the bow, holding up to 10 bolts, and a single lever that a soldier could push and pull to load, draw, and fire the weapon again and again without ever removing it from the shoulder. A trained user could empty the entire magazine in about 15 seconds. It wasn't especially accurate, and it wasn't especially powerful compared to a full-sized crossbow, so armies often dipped the bolts in poison to make up for the lack of punch. But defending a breached wall or a narrow corridor didn't need precision, it needed volume. A handful of soldiers with these things could hold a doorway against a much larger force, simply by keeping a wall of poisoned bolts in the air. This was a fully mechanical weapon, 16 centuries or more before Europe built anything close to it. Let us move further and talk about something even bigger, literally. By the 12th century, siege engineers across the Mediterranean and the Middle East had developed the counterweight trebuchet. It was one of the most elegant machines of the pre-gunpowder world. Earlier catapults relied on twisted rope or a team of men hauling on ropes to generate force. The counterweight trebuchet replaced all of that with something closer to pure physics, a massive weight, sometimes several tons, dropping under gravity to swing a long arm and fling a stone through a sling at the end. The engineering subtlety was in the proportions. Get the arm length, the counterweight mass, and the sling length right, and the machine will keep hitting the target consistently. This allowed siege crews to actually walk their shots in on a target, the same way modern artillery does. There are some accounts that describe trebuchets landing stones within a few feet of the same spot, shot after shot, at ranges beyond 300 meters. Edward I of England built a large trebuchet for the siege of Stirling Castle in 1304. It was so large that the defenders reportedly surrendered just from watching it get assembled. Gravity and leverage did the job, and it worked out through pure trial and error. None of the people who built these things had modern-day physics or chemistry. What they had was time. Generation after generation quietly refined a shape, a mixture, or a mechanism, until it worked better than anything another kingdom or enemy could build. There was a craftsman who noticed that this batch of steel behaved differently than the last one, and passed that observation down to an apprentice, who passed it down again. That is really the pattern behind every weapon we have talked about today. Greek fire was not a single genius insight, it was a guarded institutional secret refined over centuries. Wootz steel was not understood chemically, but it was understood empirically through thousands of repeated attempts. The sling bullet's shape was not calculated with equations, it was shaped by generations of slingers noticing which stones flew better. Those people were not really behind us in terms of technology, they were running a different kind of experiment. The type that was measured in centuries instead of conference papers, and in a few specific cases, they landed on solutions we still can't fully explain or reproduce today. So the next time someone calls the ancient world primitive, Remember the empire that guarded a fire recipe so well that they eventually forgot how to make it themselves. Also remember the swordsmiths who were building with nanotechnology before anyone had the word for it. We did not invent ingenuity. We just added better tools to something humans have always been doing, which is staring at a problem for as long as it takes and refusing to give up until we find a solution.